You're listening to The Watchers, a podcast where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch TV and movies about figuring out you're bisexual, but not really admitting it for a few more years. Watch movies about the future of podcasting. Watch movies about Christian Slater.
This is officially the most stressed I have ever seen you.
I'm so stressed. This is the most important movie to me in the world. And I know how embarrassing that is, and I don't care.
Here's my first review before we get into it. It's certainly the horniest movie
It is definitely the horniest movie we watched. Yeah, I know. Sometimes I forget about that because it's this movie just like exists in my brain from start to finish as like a really important piece of literature.
Yeah, I understand. It is hilariously teen horny though. Like it's not a sexy movie. It's a very horny movie.
It's a very horny movie. And it's horny in a way that the 90s I feel like were horny. Like
totally.
It's not. There's this like crazy, stupid online discourse right now about how teens aren't having sex anymore. And I'm like, maybe they should have more movies like this.
Maybe that's the problem. Yeah, really, the like teen, like sex romp movies are just gone, right? We don't have those anymore, I don't think. Yeah, I could be wrong.
That's true. I don't watch a lot of teen movies these days. Yeah. But yeah, like I was listening to... Wow, it took me 3 seconds to shout out another podcast. I was listening to the Rewatchables podcast on The Ringer, and they were talking about Cruel Intentions. And that's like a horny teen movie.
Yeah.
You know? Like, these things are not...
I love that movie. That movie has one of my favorite endings, still, genuinely, of any movie ever.
Yeah. I've seen it a couple of times, but not for a very long time. I listened to that Rewatchables and I was like, oh yeah, I remember watching this movie and really, really loving it.
I haven't seen it in so long and I wonder if it holds up, but it does have one of the songs that makes me cry so hard. And I don't know if it's because of the movie or not.
I thought that was all songs.
It's a long list.
I thought that was like music and words put together.
Kind of like my default is just sort of weeping. But no, it's Counting Crows Colorblind. Oof.
Oh, I don't even know if I know that off the top of my head.
Oof. That's a good one.
Speaking of soundtracks,
we
watched Pump Up the Volume.
And I'm Andrea.
One of the best soundtracks in the history of movies. Oh, and I'm Jodie, yeah. One of the best soundtracks in the history of movies, in my humble opinion.
It's fantastic.
I fucking love every song in this movie. I have the CD still. It is downstairs. I will be putting it in my car later today when I drive to the beach. Like, I love it so much. This is the movie that introduced me to Concrete Blonde. This has like a unreleased Beastie Boys song that still has never seen the light of day.
Oh, wow.
Like, yeah. Incredible soundtrack.
It's really great.
Descendants, like, yeah. I'm wearing my Bad Religion t-shirt in like...
It's got everybody's favorite Pixies song, unless you're a huge Pixies fan.
Yeah. It's so good. And it's like, there's songs in the film that aren't on the soundtrack that are great. Like, it's just... Ugh. Yeah, the music is a very important part of the plot of this movie too, in a way. Like, I've actually seen this movie in lists of like movies about music, almost like not about music, but movies that are like music movies.
How would you say it? It's kind of like the music is another character in this movie.
I was trying not to say that,
but I mean it really. This movie would be a very different movie without it because it does drive. I mean, in some ways, it fully drives the plot. So much of like the parents' distaste for the teens is wrapped up in the music they listen to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I also like. It's also the reason, which I think I mentioned last week, that this movie is not, not and probably will never be on streaming. Because the rights are impossible.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Especially if they're fully unreleased songs and stuff. I don't even know how that works.
That Beastie Boys song is like never Jesus and Mary Chain is like, there's also the like glimpses of the tapes that you see in the background Like, and people forget that, like, the way you discovered music when you were this age, pre-internet, was like movies, your friends.
Yep.
You know, like, I think we've talked about this in the past, looking up like other bands on the label that one of your favorite bands is on, like Epitaph
or like
Records.
Who was in their like thanks.
Yeah. And so, like, I remember watching this movie and looking at those tapes and being like, oh, okay, I know some of these people, I don't know other people. Like, this is 1990. Soundgarden is in this movie. Like, that's pre-grunge craziness. Like, yeah, it's... we could do a whole other podcast about the music in this movie. But we have to actually talk about the movie as well, I guess.
Do you want me to tell you what it's about?
I do, very much so. I'm like a little afraid. I've been afraid all week of this conversation because I can't have my heart broken.
I mean, if you had to guess, how do you think I feel about this movie?
I feel like you probably enjoyed it very much.
Yeah.
But that just like everything else we've watched, you didn't watch it at the time where it would have burrowed its way into your soul.
But it's
and
so
lived there.
This movie, it's so obvious that if I had watched it as a young person, I would have been obsessed with it. Like, it's so weird that, like, for as just overtly horny as it is, and like, but it's like, it's not like, I didn't find a whole lot in this movie problematic. Like, should I have?
No.
Because I didn't.
No, that's the thing. This is one of the weirdly most unproblematic movies we've watched in terms of the homophobia. In terms, I mean, there's no people of color in this movie. That's
right.
Like, that's an obvious theme in a lot of the movies we've talked about, just from the time period that we were watching movies in our where we grew up. But yeah, like the blatant homophobia that we've seen in the other movies, even if it's like kind of frowned upon by the like overarching like ethos of the movie, it's not really like as, I don't know how to explain it. Like, obviously we'll get into it, but like, you know, the character that's the caller that's gay, like nobody else that is our heroes in this movie thinks that is something that should like lead you to being bullied or whatever. Like, the bullies are in existence, but they're not characters in this movie.
No. And
they don't really show up at all.
And even at best, in a lot of the movies we've watched, like homosexuality, I always feel like a school teacher using that word like that. But it's often
the spectrum.
Like it's often like treated as a joke, and sometimes it's in like a like sort of like it means it in a way it's intended to be sort of good natured, whether it is or isn't. Like, that's sort of our best case scenario. Other than this movie where the homophobia is an issue, obviously, and it's spoken out against really openly. Yeah, I was really kind of impressed by that.
Yeah. And, you know, this is 1990. It's a few years later, but it's still in that same generation.
Oh, totally.
Like,
well, and then we still haven't talked to what's this movie about?
Oh, yeah.
Hold on.
Tell me what this movie's about, and then we'll just keep going.
This movie is about a shy, sensitive boy named Mark. He's moved to a new town where he's struggling to fit in. He's kind of not even trying to fit in. And his parents bought him a shortwave radio, ostensibly to keep in touch with his friends where where did he move from?
The East Coast. I think it was New York.
Okay. So to keep up with his friends on the East Coast, and instead he starts like a radio show, and he becomes a local celebrity, though mystery celebrity, because it's like his alter ego is this nighttime radio host called Happy Harry Hardon. Is that right? And all of the students in his school become obsessed with this character, and it just kind of like it's kind of just a movie about that. The adults are disapproving the more they find out about it. It becomes like a big media frenzy. The big inciting incident in this is it's a call-in show kind of. So because it's 1990, the way it works is people write into a P.O. box, which is important. And then leave their phone numbers. He calls them and he talks with them on the air. And one of his callers is a kid who's talking about killing himself. And we find out in the movie that he does. And then that's when it sort of gets more serious because the authorities get involved and it kind of spirals out from there. What else do we need to know? One of his regular writers is a girl at school who sends him really
bad
like sexy teen letters.
Yes. She read a lot of Anaïsnin, basically.
And she rolls and figures out that it's Mark because he returns a book to the library.
Lenny Bruce book, yeah.
That's right. It's Lenny Bruce's book, and she connects it back to him. And then, so she's the only one who knows it's him. She kind of becomes his partner in crime. And a subplot is that the school has a really great record for test scores and stuff. And we find out throughout the movie it's because the principal of the school just boots out any student who might mess up that record. And so all of that kind of coalesces into teen rebellion. What else? That's like the major stuff. The teens take over the airwaves at the end, and Christian Slater and his girlfriend go to jail.
Yeah.
because for a few reasons. He's stealing somebody's telephone line. Also like some stuff like inciting violence and stuff. What else?
I mean, I think that basically covers it. Like, this has a very low stakes setup. Like,
other than the fact that it does end with a teen boy going to jail.
Yeah. I think you're supposed to assume that, like, because they're teenagers, they're minors, like, their parents are probably, like, hurt. So one thing that also is in there is that his dad, Christian Slater's character's dad, is the new superintendent of the school district, which is why they moved to this buttfuck Arizona.
Right.
We kind of, I think, are led to assume that they don't spend like another decade in jail after this, but they don't tell us that.
No, it's got major. It's so funny. I was starting to say off air, whatever, that it's really interesting to look at the movies you and I have both brought to this show collectively, because there's a real streak of teen rebellion in your collection. Like, this movie has a lot in common with The Legend of Billie Jean, including the fact that Christian Slater is in it.
Yeah, a few years older.
But it's like there's something very similar to everybody dressing up like Billie Jean and kind of like spreading that rebellion around while she sort of disappears at the end with the teens, because that's the cool thing. There's like a thing at the end, where he's like, everybody, take to the airwaves or whatever, and all of the teens
wept the first time I saw that ending.
It is, honestly, I was really genuinely moved by that.
Yeah,
it's like all these kids then have their own shows and get to amplify their own voices, and he kind of disappears into that, which I think is really cool.
And I think we have to say here that obviously there's been a lot of takes in the recent years that this movie was like predicting podcasting and predicting the internet and predicting like all of the negative shit that comes when everybody has a microphone and can just blast their thoughts out into the world. Like, yeah, I get it. Don't ruin my fucking movie. Like, by comparing it to the internet and podcasting. Like, this is a moment in time when, like, people felt very isolated. And, I also think that, like, as the soundtrack is also a character in this movie, so is Suburbia. Like, the scenes pulling back from his development that is like half built in Arizona, the like little boxes on the hillside vibe of the whole thing. The scene that's behind me, to me, as soon as I saw it again, was like, that looks like a Laurie Simmons photograph, who's like a photographer that worked with miniatures in the 80s. Like, it's got a very like suburban, mindless, you know, and that's reflected in like Heathers and also in some of the other movies we've watched too. This idea of like suburbia being soul crushing and all the adults thinking it's the greatest thing in the world and all the teens being like, there's so much shit going on under the surface that is not being dealt with. And like, you know, suicide plays a big role in this movie as it does in some of the other movies we've watched. And I think that that also was really, really present in movies around this time. I read that, and I don't think I knew this, but the original, so the director and writer of this movie, Allan Moyle is the, I know, we'll get to it. Allan Moyle is the writer and director of this movie. Mm-hmm. And it was the original screenplay came from like a short story or novel that he had kind of written that was based around the suicide of a friend of his, or someone he knew when he was younger. And so this theme of, I don't know, I guess I just really like movies where teenagers are like actual people with emotions and feel like the world is kind of fucked up and are having trouble dealing with it.
You know, I was joking about, you know, Harry, Happy, Hard On. That's the right order,
Happy,
right?
Harry, Hard On. Happy Harry, Hard. You can also call him Hard Harry for short, if you'd like.
That's right, yeah. Talk hard. Yeah. That, like, he's this, like, you know, really explicitly horny character, but he also is just, like, you know, voicing, because it's not just that. That's not the only, it's often what he's talking about, but it's not the only thing he's talking about. And he is giving voice to, we've talked about this a lot too, that like often in the movies that we watch, the teens don't talk the way you expect teens to. Mm-hmm. And it's like giving them a way to kind of articulate feelings that they might not necessarily have the language for. And this is sort of doing that, but in a way that feels much more like kind of like authentic. Like Mark is obviously a more sensitive, eloquent teen than you expect from teens, but he does kind of feel like a regular teenager in a lot of ways.
He feels like a guy I knew in high school. Like, not a specific one, but he feels like I could have known someone like this in high school and probably did.
Yeah. And like being able to say the things he does on mic that he can't say out loud during the day is a kind of version of what we've talked about before, but just in a much more like concrete.
A few years later, he would have had a live journal. Like,
oh yeah. You know, and a few years after that, he would, I hate to break it to you,
have a podcast. I know, but we're not.
I think what he would have is a Twitch stream. Because,
oh, geez, you're right.
Because podcasts in general,
right.
like, without a lot of setup and coordinating, don't have the call and response. Or it's not even that they don't have the ability. Of course they do. I run a couple that do that, but it's the format isn't.
Yeah, it's not
often
as
the
loose.
one.
Yeah.
With like kids tuning in at a certain time to interact and this like big like put on character, like that's all very. I have a friend who's a professional Twitch streamer, and I really thought of him watching this. Like,
yeah. His radio show is also the place where a lot of the stuff that's going on at the school like comes to light because people call in and write in and stuff. And so, you know, he like in the tradition of prank calls and people calling people randomly in the 80s and 90s, like on their landlines, you know, he finds the phone number for the guidance counselor who like tried to convince the pregnant girl that she should drop out. Mm-hmm. You know, he just calls him at home.
It's so good. I love that. There's that one moment where he does get reverse prank called where like those two girls write in and he calls and realizes that they're
fucking with him.
That was like a fun little, because it's like, yeah, some of this is going to be very serious and some of it is just going to be kids fucking around.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. Christian Slater has said this is one of his favorite roles he's ever done.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Yeah. It's like it's the thing that he still like really loves. He mentioned it in like an interview with, I think, Variety. They he's talked about, he says, that is my favorite movie, I think, that I've ever done, and to a large degree, favorite job. I felt like it was ahead of its time. It wasn't a typical high school movie, and it really did get into some of the darker, more gruesome details of what it's like to actually be a teenager in high school. And he says, after this, I think it would be fun to re-examine, like, what the heck happened to Mark Hunter? Where is the kid that had the pirate radio station? But now it might be, who cares, because everybody's got a podcast. And that was like the original underground podcast before any of this stuff was going on. Mm-hmm. But I love that he still has a real soft spot for this movie, because like a lot of times you see people who were iconic in certain movies that were like cult classics that really kind of disavow it later on and are like, well, you know, I make important work now and I was a teenager then. And he's like, no, this was like an important movie to me, which I really fucking love.
I love that. I can't stop thinking about this movie as compared to Heathers.
Yeah, understandably. I mean, they're like back to back. It's Christian Slater.
And they're dealing with so many of the same themes and ideas. But Heathers and a lot of movies like it, you know, the way they talk about suicide, the way they talk about all of that, it's almost like it has to be turned into a kind of joke and really amplified to be able to talk about it for it to be like acceptable or palatable or whatever for
to be like a movie.
Yeah. And this one just kind of lets it be. And it's still a teen movie.
Yeah.
But it lets it kind of handle that stuff more seriously. It's cool.
Yeah, like I was thinking about this weirdly in relation to last week's movie, Hiding Out, which is like, there's like, it could have been a quieter story, but they had to keep upping the ante with like Russian mobsters and like, you know, hanging from the ceiling of, you know, like it had a little bit of that. I mean, I don't want to give it too much credit. It had a little bit of that heart in it.
Yeah.
You know, but everything from that time, like Heathers has these really, the moments that me and my friends really grabbed onto were not the over-the-top, blowing up the school, like, you know, sort of fake suicide parts. They were the cow tipping in the woods, like, you know, the cafeteria scene, things like that really felt like they reflected high school at the time. And so this movie kind of dispenses with all of the over-the-top, like, until the ending, which even that is not as over-the-top as it could have been.
Right.
The helicopter, like you said, is a bit much, but... You know, the stakes are very low, very small, very personal to a small group of people. This is not like nobody's getting, you know, sort of, I don't know, like they're not trying to blow up the school. Like it's just,
right.
Yeah. Like it feels like smaller stakes, but that allows it to really, I think, resonate more for teenagers at the time because it feels like you could actually, this could happen where you live, you know? So, I love this movie so much.
Yeah, you love an empowered teen.
I do. I really do. Especially an empowered girl, which in this case, she is a bit manic pixie dream girl, more than a bit. But she also is confident, and she is outspoken and determined and, like, has her own... To an extent, drive. We don't know too much about her other than like what he sees of her, unfortunately.
It is cool to see her be like, I love that she is so like unwilling to let him kind of define her role in this throughout the whole thing. I also really I thought we were getting set up for some sort of like love triangle of Mark, Nora, and Paige, and that like
because he at one point he's looking at Paige because she's pretty, and he's like, he's, pretty girl,
and he says hi to her when they're dancing,
and then runs away.
Runs away. And I thought it was going to be a thing where like both of those girls were going to have some sort of like on-air kind of relationship or whatever with Harry, and that Mark was going to get caught up in it. But no, Paige is just this like sort of symbol for everything that is sort of like, you know, not like, symbol for, because she doesn't stand for it, but like everything that's put on these students. Paige is a really good example of why it's bad. Like,
she's like the one who has all the high expectations on her. She's popular, she's pretty, she's smart, she's gets good grades, she's applying to Yale. Like her parents are really overbearing. Like, and she one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when she blows up her shit in the microwave.
It's
like, who hasn't wanted to do that at some point?
Totally. And then her at the town hall just like losing it on the cameras was so fun.
I love her. She's what, in my mind, like, we talked about like the stratification of high school and all of that and the different cliques and groups and stuff. And that's not present as much in this movie, but the one place it is present is in Paige as a character, who is like the popular, smart, perfect, pretty girl. Yeah, I just love her sort of like leaving behind all that shit and just, you know, the hanging out in a field or parking lot vibe in this is really strong, which I really love. I know I grew up in like really crowded North Jersey, but we did have some spaces where we could be outside and like hang out in fields and parking lots and, you know, everybody hanging out on their cars and drinking beer. Like it felt very real.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think is certainly North and South Jersey have in common. And I think most places where teens live, which I guess is everywhere. Maybe not so much anymore, but it was definitely,
Yeah. For us, it was we called it the service entrance, and I don't know why, but like the area where the like power lines where they cut out in the woods for the power lines to go through. There's that. There was the train tracks. There was 7-Eleven. Those were the main ones. Places we called the woods, which were like a little group of trees.
Yeah, we had that. I mean, I know South Jersey actually has woods, which, you know, you don't really know. But in our neighborhood, my neighborhood and the adjacent one also had the woods connecting the two, which like you could see directly through. Like it wasn't really, we spent a lot of time there. We've got a Duncan-like character in this movie a little bit.
Yeah, we do. I got a right to an education.
And so he's very sweet. And he starts out, it's like before you really know all like what sort of like corruption is happening at the school, he just is this like kind of like they want you to think, the school anyway wants you to think he's like this loser troublemaker, and he is a little bit of a troublemaker, and he becomes a bigger troublemaker, though justifiably so. And I found him really endearing. I just immediately, he's like a kid I would have been friends with,
definitely,
for sure. I just really felt for him. It's very sweet.
And I think, you know, he is sort of the ramping up of them kicking people out of school for like their test scores and stuff. Like first it's this like Louis Chavez kid that they were talking about, but then it starts to kind of keep like, you find out about the girl that got pregnant, and then this kid Maz gets kicked out, and then they start kicking out other people that are involved with the radio situation, passing tapes around, and like so they eventually Nora gets expelled as well, and it starts like spiraling out of control.
You know who else is in this movie?
Seth Green. I know, for like a minute, but yes, I know. I always forget he's in it, and then he pops up, and I'm like, oh yeah, him.
It's so funny to see him playing like he's like supposed to be kind of cool. Like you can't. I love Seth Green, but come on, I know. Apparently, also side note with the Christian Slater part, just going back to his feelings about this movie, Sam Esmail, who did Mr. Robot, which is the show that Christian Slater was in for, you know, however many years recently, is apparently a huge fan of Pump Up the Volume and snuck in references to it on his show over the years. That's so fun.
Yeah. I love it.
Aww.
I feel like I don't know how to talk about Samantha Mathis in this movie. I don't know that I can.
No?
No, we might need to just not.
So you said at the beginning that this movie...
Did I? I don't recall.
It's so funny. You and I have talked so openly about our like various queer awakenings, but this one is different for you, huh?
This is the one.
The one.
Yeah, it is. This is the one. Yeah, I have no way to speak about this movie in regards to that. I mean, like, it's the backyard scene, right? Like,
it's that scene. It's well, not even to be like whatever that scene, and the one sort of directly following it, are really interesting to me because I'm going to talk about it with a little more distance, I think, than maybe you're able to.
Good.
And it's interesting to see the way Mark and Nora both are at night versus at school in general.
Yeah.
Because he's still a little bumbling in that scene, right?
Yeah,
like he's kind of like overwhelmed bumbling by her, and she's like the like cool hot girl who's like, you know, kind of like sort of like waking up the part of him, because like Harry is like a very exaggerated version of what he kind of wants to be.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that's cool and the thing that is, you know, less about my feelings about these two characters and more about the movie is that like she does kind of, and this is a little bit of the manic pixie dream girl part of it, she does kind of like bring that out of Mark as opposed to, you know, and so that's cool. And then they both go back to being like shy, doofy teenagers in the daytime. Their little kiss is so chaste. It's like,
I know the way that shot is also very it's very sweet, and it feels like we're watching something that we're not supposed to be watching, but it's like so like it's almost like a romantic, like they've realized that they really like each other. It's not just like, you know, it's not just the performance of it, like her writing letters and him performing for the microphone. It's like, oh, they actually like each other as people. And, you know, the scene the night before, after they like are like rolling around on the ground, she basically like kind of stops and like kind of runs away. And I've always found that part to be a little bit unexplained, like why she suddenly decided that she needed to stop things from like progressing, because it just seems like she's so confident, she's so forward, and then it almost feels to me, and I'm totally projecting here, like the male person that wrote this movie was like, we want her to be forward and confident and all of that, but at some point we have to remember that he's the guy.
Right.
And she needs to not push it too far. Like, it definitely felt like there was no other reason for that stopping point other than, like, we want to make sure that she's still a girl. She's still a little, like, you know, needs to be pursued a little bit, and going to just, like, you know, she'll push him, but then she wants him to kind of pursue her, which I think is kind of bullshit, but whatever. You take what you can get in 1990 for female empowerment.
Yeah, I could see that maybe that's the case.
I also watched this movie like 100 times, and so things that I didn't notice at first, like that moment, I definitely now later on I'm like, oh yeah, that feels a little awkward that she just suddenly decided that it was too much and she had to leave, and it's like,
especially when she was so confident to begin with. Although I wonder, I mean, part of it, we spend a lot more time with Mark, and so we see the kind of shy, quieter daytime Mark a lot more than we see daytime Nora.
But when we do see daytime Nora, she's not necessarily, that's I think what feels off to me about it, because she's not shy and retiring at school.
Right.
She's got her best friend. She like dresses really funky. She kind of she seems very, in the scenes during the daytime at school, she actually seems quite free.
Yeah, she
seems quite herself.
And again, manic pixie,
of course,
dream girl of it all. It's like we need her to be that way to pull Mark out, because if she is more,
she can't be Mark as a girl.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I do find that a little off, but definitely, like, I think seeing young, confident women was clearly very important to me in movies at this time. That were like in charge of themselves, in charge of their sexuality, like not apologetic for it. Like, I think that it's actually something that 90s and late 80s movies were starting to do. not well, but like for the time, pretty well.
Right.
You know? I will love Samantha Mathis for the rest of time for doing this movie. It was like her first real role too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she's so confident in this.
Yeah, she's great.
There's just like, I don't know, there's something really confusing when you're like, how old was I when this movie came out? 14-ish. Young, confused, queer person seeing two extremely hot people, like, half naked making out in a backyard that both are pretty much like your type. It was just really like, what is happening right now?
What do I do now?
What do I do? Who am I? What is happening?
Man, Samantha Mathis has worked a ton, but not in anything. I was like,
yeah.
I obviously know Samantha Mathis. Like,
yeah.
And in my head, I'm looking through her IMDb for like The Thing.
Right.
There isn't a The Thing for her.
No. Well, and she's been working. But yeah.
I mean, and she's in big stuff.
Yeah.
Like, especially TV shows, but just like one episode here and there.
Yeah.
What the hell?
And smaller
That's so
things.
Interesting.
She was on Billions for a while. But yeah, she has been working consistently ever since. And it's sort of confusing as to where she's been because I cannot recall seeing her in anything beyond this.
It's literally just like one episode of something of like literally like House, Lost. Like this is why I know her. But in my head, I really was just like looking for the movie where I'm like, oh, right, obviously this is the one. Grey's Anatomy. She's done all of those shows, but just that's so.
So I think
actors like that are so interesting.
Well, and one thing that I think is sort of a background to all of this is that she was dating River Phoenix when he died. And she was there when he died.
Right. So she's been kind of. And
so, yeah, she was a part for a moment of this like Hollywood teen scene, you know? And then when River Phoenix died, like that was a big fucking deal when River Phoenix died.
Yeah.
But she was his partner at the time. And so that really kind of, I think she's spoken about it really through her off of a track that she had been on.
That's sad. And she really disappears because she was steady working again in like TV movies or like one episode here or there, a handful of episodes here or there, like various shows.
Yeah.
And
she works in production, it seems like.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I like to see that.
Yeah, moving to the other side of it. Cheryl Pollack is an independent producer in Los Angeles whose passions are documentary film and animal rights. So that's cool. Good for her.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like to learn that she's just found the thing she really wants to be doing, I'm assuming. That's great.
Yeah. There's a lot of sort of revisitings of this movie, similar to Heather's once it hit like 25, 30 years old. Vice did a whole thing on it. So did The Ringer. The Ringer did a rewatchables on it also, which I listened to. Should we talk about
the one major flaw in this movie?
Which is the fact that his parents don't know? Or
he's screaming in his basement and chain smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
This house is not big enough for them not to.
Dumb.
His parents are like Heather's parents, like yes. Heather's parents, like the parents in Heather's.
Yes.
Just, but
the only difference,
but not entirely. They are
because
concerned.
They used to be cool. Is the thing. That's the thing about the parents. That's like the big overarching thing. Is like his dad has Grateful Dead posters in his office. Mark is stealing records from his dad to play on his show. Like his parents used to be cool.
Yeah.
They used to be counterculture.
They care about him. It's not that they're uninvolved.
No.
And we have so many scenes of them at dinner. They're misguided.
They really want him to get laid, though.
Good God, do they want him to get a girlfriend.
They really want him to get laid.
It is so funny.
Their joy when they see Nora.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're really worried their son's a little freak because he doesn't have a girlfriend.
It's like, no, he's a pirate radio DJ in the basement inciting violence.
And I don't know how you don't know, because he's down there screaming.
Yeah.
And
he does a very bad job of hiding all that stuff, like when they come downstairs.
He doesn't even try.
Yeah.
The most absurd part in this movie is when they are standing directly in front of his turntable and his microphone, and one of them says, for a second we thought you were that pirate radio DJ, and it's just like, oh, did you?
Yeah.
What tipped you off? I know that, like, we need them to be out of the way of that.
Yeah.
But it's like, you could have one scene where his parents are coming down the stairs and he, like, throws a blanket over all of the equipment and, like, tries to, like, fan the smoke out of, like, a small
nobody cared
window.
if you smoked in your room at that point, though.
Well,
the
that's
smoking
true,
was, like, I smoked in my house when I was a teenager.
But I get the impression that if they knew he was a smoker, they would be upset. And it's impossible that they don't know that he's a smoker.
Maybe. But I think that might be a later version of us looking back. Because I smoked in high school a lot.
Right.
And, like, eventually my parents gave up and I smoked in my room. Like, it just was. And I had very overbearing parents in a lot of ways. Like, it just was the culture.
Do you think they think he's down there smoking cigarettes and, like,
talking to his friends back home?
Mm-hmm. So funny.
I know. And then they're so relieved when there's a girl in his room and it's like,
they really, like, are like, no, please get back to fucking. Like,
yeah,
please.
Exactly.
We're so worried our son's a little freak.
Yeah. Yep. Ugh. I know that, like,
she's really cool in that scene too, because she realizes and pops up to take the fall for it.
Yep.
And,
Yep. Yeah, she saves him in that moment. Oh my God. There's so many good lines in this movie. I know that us, like, just reading lines from a movie is not good entertainment, but is it bigger than a baby's arm? Like, so many things that, like, seeped into my vocabulary at that age that I didn't realize were from this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Eat your cereal with a fork and do your homework in the dark. This is also just the perfect Gen X movie. Like,
yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the Gen X of it all.
I'm a phony fuck, just like my dad. Sorry, that was the one that really...
Yeah.
Also, Yo Loretta, I'm already expelled, really. I love that
He's
character
so great.
So much, yeah.
He's so great. Yeah, an exhausted decade where there's nothing to look forward to and no one to look up to. All the great themes have been used up and turned into theme parks.
Ooh.
Like, so many good... Like, I know that people make fun of Gen X for how ironic and disaffected and over it we all were. But I feel like this movie is trying to get at the why of it all, which is the boomer parent situation and the fact that, like, we were a smaller generation. We had all these expectations placed on us by our boomer parents, but they fucked up the world. They were supposed to change everything in the 60s and then just kind of gave up. Mm-hmm. Like, it's... Everybody talks now...
Yeah, and his parents are such a good example of that.
Exactly.
With what you were talking about with them, how they used to be cool.
Yeah. They used to be cool. They used to be countercultural. And now he worked for the school system and his mom is just, like, concerned about him making friends. And, like, they've stopped seeing how fucked up the world is around them. And he still sees it. And that's, like, that is the feeling of being, like, brought up at that time. People all talk now about, like, millennials and Gen Z and the differences between those two things. But this was I don't want to say original, because of course there were generations before this, but, like, for us and for me,
right.
Like, the boomer Gen X thing was that, And this movie really gets at it.
Boomer of that dynamic, huh?
Excuse me?
As a millennial and
yes,
Gen
you're the
Z
boomer.
being the oof, a doof.
Yeah.
Feels bad.
It does feel bad, doesn't it?
Uh-huh. Well, you wouldn't know because you're on the
Gen
good
X.
half of the...
Yeah. And it's funny because, like, there's all these jokes on, like, TikTok and whatever about how Gen X is, like, the generation that doesn't want to be talked about. Mm-hmm. And I honestly just think that it's that we were talked about so much at the time.
Right.
Like, it was the slacker generation. It was, like, they don't care. They just want to drop out of society.
Tune in and tune out,
Yeah, it's like they, the boomers... Tune in and tune out. Yeah,
fine.
Tune in, drop out. But like, we were the generation that, like, the boomers put all of their shit that they gave up on us, and we're like, oh, you guys just don't care. And it's like, no, you fucking don't. Like, you fucked everything up, you know?
Right.
So it's nice to revisit that a little bit.
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like then for us, it's like millennials are like, look, we tried. We didn't, you know what I mean? Like, let's just keep blaming the boomers. And now instead of being like putting it on the generation ahead of us, behind us, we're putting it on them in a much more desperate way. Like, please, like, we need you to fix this, which is also not fair.
No. And like, I've caught myself doing that with students, just being like, you guys got to fix this because we're fucked.
You know who we should talk just a little bit about is the funky English teacher.
Jan. Her
Audrey.
name is Jan. There's always the one good teacher.
Yeah.
In these
the
movies.
Cool thing about this movie is it really is in the hands of the teens because she's a cool teacher. She tries, but she doesn't really have much to do other than be supportive.
Yeah. She doesn't have a lot of power.
Yeah.
You know?
Which I kind of like for this
Yeah,
movie.
because she gets fired.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting. So there's the flip side of this character in Heathers, which is the hippy dippy teacher that puts on like the morning, like love-in sort of thing that is actually like just to get, you know, media attention.
Right.
But
who
this is the
actually
sincere
get what
version.
the issue is.
Yeah. This is the sincere version who like actually listens to Harry's show and thinks it's funny and like, you know, kind of gets where the kids are coming from. So why do you want to talk about her? Is it because is it because who she is?
She's Audrey, and I just love her so much from Little Shop of Horrors, obviously. The only reason we haven't covered that would have been like first on my list if you hadn't seen it.
Oh,
maybe not first on my list, but very high on my list.
I saw that in the theater with my mom.
Oh God, I just love her so much. She's got one of those faces. She's just like immediately likable the second you see her, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because I'm already in love with her because she's Audrey. Like that could be it, but you know, she's another one who's been in so many things since then. She just shows up a lot. Though again, not in a while. She's still with us, but
yeah, I mean, she's just always going to be Audrey. I almost said Audrey. She's almost going to be Audrey.
She's perfect.
Yeah, she is.
I'm just looking at pictures of Audrey now.
I know.
I love her so much.
I think I've been thinking about like why I loved this character of Mark so much as a kid. There's something to be said for the fact that like about the fact that all of these sort of like anti-hero people in these movies are men. There's no women-led version of this that I can think of from this time period. And that just, you know, it's the cause of all, or the burden, whatever. It's necessary to, as someone who's not represented in movies and film of a certain time, to just put yourself in that spot, right? Like, instead of seeing myself in this role, I just have to imagine that, like, I am Mark, right?
Right.
This is the case for every person of color, every, you know, like, that had to, like, every queer person who had to, like, see themselves in a straight romance. Like, it's just, you know, trying to find yourself in the culture is difficult.
Right.
But I think that what I'm trying to get at with this is that there's a scene where he's talking to Mr. Sirius, the Malcolm, the kid who ends up killing himself. And he says, I didn't talk to one person today. I sat in the stairwell eating lunch, reading a book. And he kind of talks about how he's like the anonymous nerd in school, like, and this idea that person who literally has no friends and just is so isolated socially, whether by his own hand or otherwise,
right,
is actually like the sort of cultural hero on the radio at night. Like, that's just, it's such a delightful and hopeful message for kids that were socially isolated and were bullied and were like, you know, eating lunch alone so nobody could like talk to them or talk about them or whatever.
Right.
Like, it really, I think, cannot be overstated how his awareness of his social isolation and his openness in talking about it on the radio, like, it reaches everybody in an interesting way.
Yeah.
Like, you know, he talks about it all the time, how like he doesn't actually have friends. He doesn't know how to talk to people. He doesn't know how to like be a human in the world. And yet everybody is obsessed with him at night. Like,
yeah,
you know,
it is cool. It's not that he pretends at night that he is the like big man on campus.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
And
yeah,
like he is very open. He really is. We talked about it a little bit at the beginning of this episode, like just kind of putting voice to
that like loneliness.
A lot of totally.
Yeah,
you're right. That is kind of remarkable.
And
I will say though, Jodie, he does refer to himself as funny looking at one point. And there is a little bit of she's all thatness to this movie where they're like,
for sure,
put the glasses on and hunch your shoulders up around your neck and we'll just all pretend like you're not still Christian Slater. My God.
And then at home, he like whips the shirt off and is like, you know, pacing around smoking cigarettes, sounding like
Jack Nicholson. You never see him wearing glasses at night. It's very funny.
Yeah. Totally. Absolutely.
But you know.
Yeah, that has to happen. Some amazing needle drops in this movie. I mean, the whole movie is amazing needle drops, but my absolute favorite one is when he starts screaming, "No more Mr. Nice Guy," and then Kick Out the Jams comes on.
That is very good.
It's so good. This does have the same. So we talked briefly about the teacher in Heathers, the like sort of therapy circle that she starts. There is a variant of that here with Bionic. Believe it or not, I care.
Oh my God, yeah. It is really well-meaning, but
yeah.
Oof.
Yeah. The truth is a virus. She burned up all her shit last night. He definitely has that Jack Nicholson sound in this as well that everybody referenced after Heathers.
Mm-hmm.
He refers to his listeners as the usual band of teenage malcontents. They say that I am deluded, demented, deranged. Down with all guidance counselors, make them work for a living.
I feel that. I still feel that. I'm sorry. I know.
My brother was a guidance counselor.
I know that it's not their fault. I know that, especially these days,
they just have no real ability to help.
Exactly. And often, and it's even worse. I want to take back what I said that I agree with that. I don't mean that. What I actually mean is give guidance counselors the resources they need to be effective and helpful. Because now it's like there are guidance counselors working across multiple schools and stuff. It's not even just that they're like posted up in their office and it's that they're not there.
Yeah. That's crazy.
It's really sad.
Counselors in schools. Shout out to the student organizers in Providence that started the Counselors Not Cops movement.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know. I have such a love for this. And he's such a like reluctant hero in this movie. Mm-hmm. But he talks about like surviving it is the whole point. High school is the bottom. We're all in pain. It can only get better. Like this is the it gets better of the early 90s. Yeah.
It's another good example, just to Legend of Billie Jean it again, like the
fair
way
is fair.
Yeah.
Steal the air, it belongs to you is something that is said at the end of this movie. Like
and it's interesting to watch him be, like you said, so reluctant at first. Like he really just wants at first this to be his little outlet to help him kind of survive the daytime hours and the school hours. And it's, you know, he really has to come to accept it. And I think Billie Jean is a little more accepting early on, but it is, both of them do have this sort of like celebrity and whatever heaped upon them, despite their efforts against it at first, or not efforts against it. That's not what I mean. That they don't really have much of a say in how that story about them is told.
Yeah.
So again, both like federal like They become like a concern at the federal level, both of them, which again, like two low stakes movies that become very high stakes just because the movies decide it.
Yeah. Yeah. Should we talk a little bit about the director for a minute?
I would love to.
I know you would. And then I also want to talk about this movie's afterlife because
cool.
I found an article in The Guardian called "Can Christian Slater's teen movie become a musical hit like Heathers?" So we will talk about this after we talk about Allan Moyle. Allan Moyle, director of this movie and Empire Records.
Empire Records, open till midnight. This is Mark. Midnight.
One of your core movies, I believe.
It is. It's something I've been really like going back and forth with this whole like run of our show where we're doing these movies, is really trying to pinpoint which movie is my pump up the volume.
Yeah.
And I think there are a couple, but I will say this is one of them where I didn't realize that's what was going on at the time. There are plenty where I'm like, oh yeah, obviously. Like, but I go back and watch Empire Records and I'm like, oh, I am in love with every single person in this movie. Like, and I have been since 1995 or whatever. Like,
yeah. It's so he is responsible for both of those movies, which is, I think, kind of cool and interesting.
Yeah.
Another
great movie soundtrack.
Yes, exactly.
So good.
So I read an interview with him in Vice, and they asked where the idea came from, and he said that there had been pirate radio stations on abandoned oil rigs off the coast of England. They were not subject to local laws controlling air content like the FCC, so they were underground, and he'd heard about them. And so apparently Pump Up the Volume was a play first. Originally, he wrote it about a suicidal young guy who was announcing his own suicide on the radio. And I ended up having too much fun playing with all the different ways he could kill himself. He was a mordant, funny kid, but he had no intention of killing himself. He just thought it would be cool to do it on air for his 10 listeners. He said, Sandy Stern read it and said, this movie is way too dark. You've got to make it friendlier. So there's the one kid in it that commits suicide, and we cleaned it up. I'm grateful to him because it probably wouldn't have been made or had Christian Slater in it without him.
Yeah.
But it's the idea of a depressed kid talking to the world and having his own private outlet. Yeah, apparently, just to tie it back into what we've been talking about for the past few weeks, he also originally wanted John Cusack for this role. Can you imagine?
Yes. No.
John Cusack in this role? Absolutely not.
No. John Cusack wishes he was Christian Slater, though, I think.
Well, no, he read it. He read the script and said, Alan, I've just played my last teenage role. Sorry, if you got me last year, I'd have jumped at it.
It's very Molly Ringwald.
Yeah. He didn't want to be a teenager anymore in the movies. Kathy Nelson, we should shout out as the music supervisor of this movie. She was working at MCA Records doing soundtracks at the time.
Oh, well, she's crushing it. I wonder
who crushed it.
Music supervisor is for Empire Records. Empire Records is maybe my favorite movie soundtrack. It's got so many songs that became important to me later. Dire Straits' Romeo and Juliet, which is a favorite. Anyway, I wish you'd never seen Empire Records, so we can watch Empire Records tomorrow, next week.
I mean, I've only seen it once.
Wait, really?
Yes, really. It was a little late for me to be obsessed with.
And how?
Because it was, 95?
95.
At least 10 years. I know we might be able to shoehorn it into our concept.
Especially if we do it
right
next.
After this. I know. So before we get to that, the first movie that Allan Moyle ever...
I'm tearing up. I'm so excited. Okay, go ahead.
directed was a film called Times Square. Have you heard of this movie?
No.
I want to watch this movie. This would be one neither of us have seen. It says it's a flop which concerned the surprisingly tame adventures of two runaway teenage girls in the Big Apple. But originally they were supposed to be like clearly lesbians in this movie. And it was like toned down by the edit. Oh. I want to watch this movie at some point because it's been referenced in other articles that I've read about other movies we've watched.
It's got a very cool soundtrack, I am learning right now.
Yeah, well, that's kind of his thing.
Is it easy to find?
I'm going to find out. I just Googled Times Square. I'm like, oh, that's a place in New York that's going to... Times Square movie, 1980.
Because I think what we should do, if we can find it, is just do a little... We can do whatever we want. And we'll do a little Allan Moyle run where we watch your Allan Moyle movie, mine, and then...
I don't know if it's possible to find it online is the only thing. Because it's... Oh, yes, it is. It's on Amazon Prime for $3.99. And Apple TV and Vudu and all that.
And the Internet Archive.
Oh, nice. Yeah, when a 13-year-old girl befriends a defiant antisocial child of the streets, the mismatch... Why are you freaking out?
I'm just so excited. I love this. This is what we should do.
Okay, so we're going to do an Allan Moyle run?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Empire Records and
I want
Times
to
Square.
If you want to.
Yeah. Why would I not?
I think that's a great idea.
I'm in this vibe right now, so... Yeah. Totally. I don't know. You may hate Times Square. It may be terrible, but I think I've wanted to watch it for a while.
I think it's a cool idea for us every once in a while to do something neither one of us have seen.
Yeah.
And I think it's very cool. I think now...
Look at the poster for this movie, though. Wait, I'm going to send you the Wikipedia in the chat.
And knowing that Allan Moyle did both of our, seminal...
Yeah.
I think that's...
Totally.
Oh, man. Look
at the poster.
Yeah, that's
amazing. A very girls just want to have fun poster.
Hell yeah. Oh, I think this is a great idea.
Okay.
I'm jazzed.
Yeah, so Allan Moyle, responsible for very important moments in our lives.
I'm not exact. Empire, you have, or maybe you don't. I have, when somebody asks me what my favorite movie is, I have to be like, well, what do you mean?
Yeah. Yes.
Because my favorite movie that I think is the best movie is The Fall. It's a Tarsem Singh movie. It is the only reason I haven't made us watch it is because it's I was in college the first time I saw that movie. It is Jodie. It's incredible, and you should watch it.
I've seen
now. The one with Lee Pace.
Yeah, I think I've seen it.
There are a few different movies called The Fall. That's the one. It's gorgeous and it's all practical effects, but you would be shocked to learn
I'll have to look again and see if that's the one I've seen.
It's incredible. I have the tattoo that's from The Fall. It is so important to me.
Okay. I'll have to see if that's the one I've seen.
But I was done cooking totally by the time I saw that movie. So
yeah,
I don't know that it works for this iteration of our podcast. Though, listeners, if you've never seen The Fall, go watch it right now. It's everything I love in a movie. It's gorgeous and it's perfect, and it makes me cry like a baby.
Shocking,
but I know. But my favorite movie is Empire Records. Mm-hmm. It's just it's the one. It's I know it by heart. You could sit here and watch me do that movie from start to finish.
I mean, the same is true of this.
Right.
This is absolutely, and it's one of the reasons why in the beginning I was like, don't ruin my movie by talking about it being the beginning of the internet, because I've seen so many articles at this point that are he would be Joe Rogan now and blah blah, and and fine, maybe, but not in my version of this movie.
Yeah, leave me alone. Leave me in my movie alone.
Yeah, don't put him in that incel, whatever. It's easy to make that leap.
Right.
But I don't think that is how this character was written. I just don't.
He's way too empathetic.
Yeah,
too.
And aware.
The way he connects with his callers and he is even with Mr. Serious, the second he realizes that he tries to call back. It's not for lack of trying.
Yeah.
He immediately, once he's back on the air, is trying to he gives that kind of, it's very teenage, but also very sweet and thoughtful. That monologue he gives about why suicide is not a good idea.
Yeah.
No way.
I know. I think the people that are saying that are just reading the surface level and the bravado part of his character and not actually understanding what this movie is about.
And that character is put on. It's not Joe Rogan's character is put on too.
Jesus Christ,
but it's it's a very different, it's
also
different.
Removing it from the time period. These were the vibes.
Well, and here's something we haven't talked about this movie that I think is so in conversation with so much of what we've talked about is like to say, like, removing it from its time. His parents suggest, and it is an end of the world suggestion, that he refuses to even consider that maybe he sees a psychiatrist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, this is, again, one of those movies where, like, mental health is not prioritized in the way that it should be, and is treated as this kind of, like, secret thing. And that's another big reason why the way he has to express himself and work through those things is with this put on character, as opposed to somebody like Joe Rogan, who is just a piece of shit. Like, there's a huge, I'm getting so worked up for, I hate that. I know.
I hate it too. It's like, you know, when I went back and, like, a couple of times I've done some research on this movie because I've wanted us to do it in the past. And every time I get to those articles that are like, this is the beginning of podcasting, I'm like, shut the fuck up. You don't understand what this movie was. And you
don't even understand podcasting. That's what I get. That's what I get protective of.
Yeah. Well, but you can't, like, everybody always gets all up in arms about shit that happened, like stuff that was created 30 years ago, and tries to put today's lens on it. And I'm about to sound like fucking Joe Rogan, but, like,
a little homophobia is okay. I know that's not what you're saying.
No, but it's like, it's also just an insincere read of this movie.
Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah. I found some reviews that came out when this movie came out that are so, like, an angst-powered teen anthem. Pump up the volume, revels ecstatically in the woes of growing up alienated, frustrated, and sexually obsessed. There's nothing new about that, of course, except for the progeny who are freaking out, the why bother generation of the totally exhausted decade. This heartfelt drama is as nasty as it wants to be and as melodramatically overwrought, which is true. It is very melodramatically overwrought.
But I think it knows that, right? Like, I do think it's just really concentrated for a reason.
Yeah.
And I like
that. Those of us that grew up with this movie also ended up probably reading Anais Nin and writing bad poetry. Like, it's just part of the, you know, and reading Henry Miller. I think Hard Harry wants to be Henry Miller also. But yeah.
This movie's great, Jodie. I don't know what you were worried about.
I just have such a true love of this movie. That
and if I'd known who the director was, I would have told you
that I was safe,
that you had nothing to worry about.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because, like, that I knew that going in, that, you know, he also directed Empire Records, and that, you know, the sensibility. I haven't seen Empire Records in a really, really long time, and I did only watch it once.
That.
I know. But so, like, I kind of assumed that there would be, but, like, my love for this movie is so dumb, like, in terms of how strong it is. Like, it's so does not meet the material, you know. But
Empire,
that's okay.
Well, but this movie does deal with some stuff that is serious in a way that it is really trying to say something.
Yeah.
Empire Records is not that movie. There are a couple of things in that movie that it's like, but it is much smaller stakes. My love for it is, I cannot explain to you how much. I'm tearing up just thinking about it.
Yeah.
I love it so much. So I understand. Like, it's not, and that's a big part of what we've been doing here. It's not about how good or important or like,
yes, we're not doing like the you know, top 100 movies. What is that podcast that Paul Scheer does?
Unspooled.
Unspooled. This isn't Unspooled.
No, this is like, here's our DNA. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Exactly.
You don't need to explain or justify. That's not what we're doing here. And you're about to get a big lesson in that on my end for next week. I think Empire Records is an incredible movie. I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I just mean, like, that movie is not changing any, like, cultural conversations or anything. It's just great.
Yeah. I'm excited. It is like, I think it came out when I was working at the video store. And I think that's why it kind of came and went. It also, the name of the video store I worked at was Empire Video.
It's so
good. Like, I think I watched it once and, like, just was in a different I was watching different movies at that time, I think.
How old were you in 95?
95, I was 19.
That
was also, I know, it was a good time. It would have been a good time for me to really get into that movie, but
Right, you just missed it.
I had a lot of shit going on when I was 19.
I didn't have time for Empire Records.
I had like dropped out of college.
Midnight.
Yeah. I had dropped out of college and was living with my parents again and working in a video store and like reconnecting with my high school friends.
These are teens right on their way to, it's the like summer before the first year of college for people. So
yeah, I was in a really bad way when I was 19. Like, it was not a good year. So
you were like, I don't need to see teens coming of age.
No, I really didn't.
I need them to. That's fair.
Really didn't.
That's understandable. I'm so excited for you to watch this movie with an open heart. I
am too.
I can't wait.
We
didn't officially announce it. I don't know how much of the conversation that we had a few minutes ago is going to make it into the edit. Maybe I'll just keep all of it.
Yeah. I mean, like we started this before we officially started recording, talking about how you weren't sure what movie we were going to do next week. And we, I think, came to it during the podcast. So
we'll just leave that
fine.
You can see it all kinds of places. Empire Records is an easy one to track down. And it is. I'm so excited.
I am too. Okay. I just want to quickly quote the New York Times review, the lead for their review of this movie. Pump Up the Volume asks the question, what's a poor younger generation to do when the traditional modes of teenage rebellion, sex, drugs, and radical politics have already been used up by its elders?
It's and again, 1990 is a little bit early to sort of have that kind of hindsight and insight. Yeah. I think it's interesting that it was.
I feel like it weirdly preceded the grunge movement in like a kind of important way. Like this and Reality Bites and things like that are all kind of tied up into one big like tangled mess for me. Mm-hmm. This movie was filmed in California, even though it was supposed to be Arizona.
It feels like California. So
yeah, the first version of this script was called Radio Death. So should we wrap up the most important movie of my life somehow?
Do you feel ready?
Last thing I wanted to mention.
Yes.
I mentioned this briefly earlier. Heathers has been turned into a musical.
Oh, yes.
And I saw an article in The Guardian about the possibility of this also being turned into a musical. It's not just like a like conjecture with no basis. So basically, a condensed version of Pump Up the Volume was presented in workshop form for a small audience at the Turbine Theater.
Oh.
This was in February of this year. And the person writing this article, Chris Weigand, said, I'm delighted to report, relieved even, since my childhood bedroom was covered with pictures and slogans from the film, that it channels the same unruly spirit. The book and lyrics are by Jeremy Desmond. So I don't know. We'll see where that ends up, but it was workshopped and presented. There's a few changes in the musical. Mark's dad is a tough police lieutenant rather than a school commissioner who's raising a son alone. He's shown to be frequently absent. It also says the ruthless and corrupt head teacher, Principal Crestwood, is here somehow both more monstrous, sacking the drama teacher for staging Fahrenheit 451.
Oh, boy, that's a little
humanized.
on the nose.
I know, it is a little on the nose. Oh, God.
I guess that stuff can work in a musical, though.
Yeah. So it was at the Turbine Theater in London for a very, very short run as a reading. So we'll see if that goes anywhere. Something to keep our eyes on.
How do you feel?
How do I feel about that happening?
Yeah.
Not good. I think I am a firm believer in just don't fuck with it. Leave it alone. Don't do it again. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't need to be redone. But that's just me. I also, one of my friends sent me, which I think is something of interest to you, a link to an article about the new Death Becomes Her possible like staged musical. Let me pull that up real quick.
I mean, that movie is primed for it.
Yeah. So there's a musical adaptation of Death Becomes Her in the works. There is now an Instagram account Forviva, the magical serum.
Love that. Oh, I love some viral. Not viral.
They're doing some Yellowjackets marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love how now our news items, since there's no news from TV world, are just like musicals coming out based on movies we've watched.
Yeah, I'll include a link to the little teaser. It's not really a trailer because it's an ad for Viva, the serum, but it is very funny and totally in theme. Like it. Yeah,
it's the right vibe.
It is totally the right vibe. I am really encouraged by this. That movie's so. You guys know because you hopefully watched it with us, but it's so campy and so turned up that it like.
Yeah. I would love to see the restaging of the first scene in that movie when Meryl Streep is like doing her kind of crappy musical as an actual musical.
That'll be very fun.
Yeah.
I love that. Yay. I'm looking forward to that.
Yes. So I guess that will probably wrap us up for this one. Everyone go listen to the soundtrack. You can't find it anywhere. But it's not, you have to like put it together yourself on like a playlist kind of. So that's kind of fun. Do an old school mix CD. But yeah, I'm going to pop that CD in my car before I drive to the beach later. But so this week we're doing Empire Records.
Hell yeah. Open till midnight. This is Mark. Midnight. I'm going to be so annoying next week. I am so sorry.
It's your turn, dude. All week I was like, have you watched it yet? What do you mean you stopped watching it halfway through? Aren't you done watching it yet? Have you watched it yet? Have you gotten to that scene yet? All week I've been texting Andrea, just like constantly bugging her about this movie. So I'm
dog sitting in a house with really poor Wi-Fi. And so it was a real struggle to get through it. And I know that your anxiety over it was worse than mine as the person trying to watch it. So, but we made it happen.
Yeah. I was very anxious about this whole thing, but
here I'm
so glad. I have to say, I did feel a little bit better about this choice, even given all of the like issues with watching it and everything. When I was talking to my best friend about this podcast and about movies recently, and the very first movie she brought up was this movie. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Right. This is why we became friends 15 years ago. It's because we bonded over this and Legend of Billie Jean instantly.
Amazing.
And so I was like, it makes sense. We have to do it.
Very fun.
So where can people find us?
They can find us at WatchersPodNJ on Instagram. They can email us at WatchersPodNJ. If you're listening and haven't yet left us at gmail.com. If you're listening and haven't yet left us a review, it would be so nice. It would
be so nice.
Did.
Yes.
Over on Apple's podcast app. Makes us very happy.
Yeah. And it helps other people find us and whatever we're doing over here.
And the one thing I like is that when people do find us, they tend to stick around. So.
And if this was your first time watching this movie, I really need to hear what you have to say. So come over to the Instagram once Andrea posts the clip for this episode and let us know. And if this is one of your most important movies like me, also let us know that, because I want to feel
Jodie just
supported.
Wants to know what every single one of our listeners thinks about this movie. Yeah. So if you're listening now, which you are because you can hear me, open up your Instagram app or your email app and send us your thoughts on this movie. Every single one of you.
Please. This is so important to me.
Oh, our Jersey connection for this movie is that one of the voices you hear at the end of all the kids with their shows says that they're in Jersey.
Yeah.
So we can't leave the episode without mentioning that.
Right. I think spiritually it's very connected to New Jersey, but that is an actual literal connection.
I'm excited to talk about the Empire Records Jersey connection.
I'm excited to talk about working at a video store again.
Hell yeah.
So, and you can find me at Jodie_Mim on Instagram, JODIE_MIM. It's just my art account. So if you don't like art, leave me alone.
I'm at AQ Andrea Q everywhere. It's not my art account. I don't do art. I make podcasts and post pictures of my dog and my cats.
Who are art.
They are.
Yes.
That's true.
All right. We did it. We did it. Steal the air. It belongs to you.
I hope this episode inspires every single one of our listeners to start a podcast. Talk hard.
Yep. All right. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.